After reviewing close to 100 synths in the past year, the SX-240 is always there in the back of my mind as one that I compare others against. Let's talk about why. Hi, I'm Zach Marr from Alamo Music here in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. This is our Alamo Sound Lab channel where we talk about all things music tech related. And today we're looking at the SX-240 once again. And this time, instead of talking about it as a synth that time forgot, we're going to talk about it as a is it worth it question. And I wanted to start by saying I've really grown over time to appreciate the SX-240 more and more. It has an odd story, but it has an even more odd sound. I really haven't found any other vintage synth that sounds quite like it. It's its own thing. It's really got its own kind of sound palette, and it really is a Kawai synth. I mean, that's, of course, it has the name Kawai on it, but as I've gotten to know some of the other synths in the Kawai line, like the K3 and the K4, which came after it, and which we're going to do a review on shortly, I am growing to appreciate some of the beautiful synths that Kawai has produced over the years. And really, they are all relatively underappreciated and not as well known. Kawai is not a name you associate with synth history in a big way like Yamaha, Korg, Roland, Sequential. It's kind of a footnote, and I am beginning to wonder how it ended up being a footnote, as the synths that a couple of them, they got really right, and the SX-240 is one of those synths. So what's interesting about it? We did another video where we talked about the history. It was produced by Taisco, which was a company that was in Japan that Kawai bought and manufactured a number of instruments, not just synthesizers with. If you want to hear more about that, watch the earlier video. But it was Taisco making synths for Kawai, and the SX-240 is kind of a flagship poly from the early mid 80s, 1984. Really untimely, and when it came out, the DX7 had already been released, and the sweep towards digital synths, the digital mania had already begun, and Kawai released the SX-240, which was an 8-voice analog DCO polysynth, which had a lot of great features, but even if you can find the reviews at the time, which kind of panned it for being late to the game and not particularly interesting in terms of not necessarily, I'll qualify that, interesting in terms of the lens of the time, which was really looking at synths, what was the latest and greatest, and how realistic and how digital they sounded. And the SX-240 is not a digital sounding synth at all. It's very much something that you can compare to maybe the Roland JX series or Juno series, but it's a really great synth. And I think part of its magic is that it has SSM chips, 2044s like the Korg Monopoly and the Korg Poly 6, as well as a number of other synths. And I think SSM chips tend to have a very dark tone. I really like the way SSM filter chips sound, and the filter on the SX-240 really does a good job of adding or of creating a very rich tone when you're using the SX-240. So what's great about it? I love just the tone of the instrument itself. I love also the dual and split modes. The dual is particularly fun to layer the two patches on. You get some really nice tones and timbres. It isn't particularly complicated. There are some drawbacks. The second oscillator, it's 2 oscillators. The second oscillator is very limited. It's kind of an on-off and tuning. You can't change the waveform, and there's not much else you can do. With it, it has a function called brass, which from what I've read is a version of ring modulation, and I don't quite understand. I should probably read the manual. It's an interesting effect, and you use the coarse setting to kind of get that ring modulation effect when it's on, and it's nice, but not particularly memorable. The ensemble is great. It's got a great, rich kind of chorus ensemble string effect that's in it, and it's really nice. It's got some basic modulation, and then it has a separate envelopes for the VCA and the VCF, and then it has an LFO that has a couple different waveforms and can go in reverse, and a sequencer, and then it's got portamento and glissando, but it just works really well. I like the tones that are in it. It's fun to play with. The programming is kind of an alpha dial rotary programmer, and it's not the worst to use. It's actually pretty easy to go on the fly. What's cool is there is a retrofit from Tontec that you can do to make it CC compatible, so you can do SysX and you get a controller to do more hands-on, an aftermarket controller to do hands-on editing, which apparently is really fun. It really unlocks it. It does have basic MIDI implementation. Otherwise, if you don't do the upgrade, apparently it's ultra rare, like only 1,000 were made. That was a comment on the previous video, and apparently that person talked to Kawai and verified that only 1,000 were made. They ceased production because it was pretty unsuccessful as it was ill-timed. So they're pretty rare, and I think I mentioned it has a sequencer, kind of interesting. Not the most easy to use, and apparently it's pretty full-featured, but thought I'd mention that. But yeah, so let's take a listen, and then we'll talk about at the end, is it worth it? What makes this valuable or not valuable from a sonic standpoint, and then also from kind of an economic standpoint. So let's listen to it, and then we'll wrap up. So there you have it. Hope that gave a sense of the kind of sounds and overall tone of the instrument. I, again, personally really like it from a musical standpoint. It's very unique sounding. I don't recognize it from a lot of music as it wasn't widely used. So it's a unique paintbrush that you could use in your own kind of home studio. They are kind of priced randomly when they come up for sale. They're rare. I've seen them go anywhere from $1,000 to right now I looked this morning and I saw one for $3,000, and I think it's kind of random when they come up what they're priced at. It does have a battery problem. If you're not careful, it can leak and ruin the board. So you got to make sure it's kept up to date and changed. The most famous use, and again, this is from a comment in the previous video that I could find, was Junkie XL has used this in a couple movie soundtracks, among other synths, like one of the Mad Max movies and the Batman vs. Superman, apparently among others. So kind of cool use there. But personally, do I think it's worth it? I think yes, from a collector standpoint, for sure. It's super rare. It's interesting. I think it looks really cool. I like the aesthetic of it, and it just sounds good. So from a collector standpoint, I think it's an interesting piece. It's rare, very cool. From a musical standpoint, I do think it's very unique. There is a VST apparently that you can play that sounds pretty good. I didn't get a chance to play with it, so I'm curious for someone that's played both if they think they sound similar. But I think from a musical standpoint, like I said in our previous video, I do think it is underrepresented in music. So someone could take this and create some interesting new sounds and textures and perhaps have a hit song, and people will be like, what is that sound? Who knows? It definitely is its own thing, and I think it's a great thing. So I definitely think it is worth it. Is it worth $3,000? I don't know. But if you could pick one up for $1,000 to $1,500, probably not a bad steal, especially given the prices you pay for other vintage analog synths. So that's my thoughts on this. Love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below, a suggestion. Did I leave something out? Is there other cool facts that you would want to know about this that you could share to others? If you didn't, please hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications. We'd love to see you here again, and thanks for watching.